What you doing?
Unloading the truck.
So we went to Gary's aunt's house this morning and helped her clean up her yard, got rid of a bunch of junk she didn't need. So we're getting out in the garden a little bit later today. It's going to be pretty hot. Just thought we'd show you real quick. Our tomatoes are producing quite a bit. So we've got a bunch of cherry tomatoes, and the bigger tomatoes are setting fruit, but they're just not quite ripe yet. We do have weeds kind of growing in that weed fabric we put in. The weed fabric is actually doing a really good job. It's us that's not doing a good job. So we're not pulling out those weeds in between, like where we planted the plants and kind of burned those holes. And now they've just grown. They're out producing some of the plants. But we're still getting so many tomatoes. So just thought we'd kind of show you what the garden is looking like today. Now this is one of those orange accordion tomatoes. So it's not ripe yet, but we're pretty excited to see how this one turns out. It's our first time growing it. We planted a bunch of watermelon, or different variety of melons actually. So that's what's here. They're starting to grow. Got weeds growing all around the edges. Same thing over here, more melons. Trying to see if they can compete with the weeds. Now here's a look at all of our beans. So we have a few different varieties of beans growing up here on this cattle panel trellis. You can see they're just covered in flowers. So on this side, it's all those red flowers. And on this other side over here, this one has purple flowers. So this one is growing pretty good. There's just a bunch of purple flowers all over it. So we would expect we're going to get a bunch more beans as the season continues. Now, I really like the beans we planted here with these red flowers. This is working out pretty well. We didn't really overplant on this side, so it's working out pretty well. They're growing up that trellis. Our tomatoes are growing right next to it. Things are doing pretty well. On this side, I overdid it with the beans. So planting the beans next to these peppers is probably not the smartest idea I've ever had. The beans have absolutely taken over this whole garden bed, and they're just growing like crazy. So we are getting some peppers, but we're mostly getting beans. We got a couple of pumpkins here that are looking like they're almost ready to pick. They're turning orange. And just a couple bush beans in here that are growing amongst the weeds. So those little baby beans on there, we'll get those soon. How's it going, babe?
Oh, good.
What do you think of the weeds in the garden?
I think it's better than it was last year. I mean, it's not perfect, but I don't think we live in a perfect world, so we just do what we can, right, to get by. Weed fabric works really well, except for where we put the holes in to put the plant. It seems like the weeds are coming up with the plant, so we definitely have to pull weeds in this garden, but at least it's not the whole ground, so that's the positive side of it. We do not have time to be out here every day pulling weeds. We have multiple things going on. We both work full-time jobs, take care of all these animals, and then whatever else Katie decides to come up with.
So here's our Jersey Devils. These are actually suffering from blossom end rot. These plants are struggling. So of all of our tomato plants, the Jersey Devil plants are having the hardest time, it looks like. But we are getting tomatoes still from it. Here's a look at our lemon cucumber. So it's been incredibly hot here this summer, at least the past couple weeks. So some of the plants are turning yellow and having a hard time. Squash looks like it's doing pretty well. Surprisingly, our cucumbers are still doing pretty well. We've got peppers. So peppers are hit and miss. We're doing okay with these Buena Mulata peppers. You can see there's plenty of peppers on there for me to harvest. Some things are doing pretty good, like our jalapenos are not, and our habaneros are not. But you can see the long beans in the background there just growing like crazy. So for the most part, we're getting quite a bit out of the garden. The squash is real happy and doing well. So this is our delicata squash. That's growing great. We've got some random zucchini kind of growing in here that must have just volunteered. So we'll harvest that. But overall, the squash looks healthy and happy, like it's producing pretty well for us. Now our squash actually grows pretty well. It's really easy for us to grow. It absolutely takes over these raised beds. So we try to grow it up trellises as much as we can, but it grows so quickly. We it's tough to kind of keep up with. It has a mind of its own and it just kind of takes over. But it's really pretty growing over these arched panel trellises. And it's still got flowers, so hopefully it'll produce some more squash for us. And by the end of the season, just be loaded up. We do let it kind of just grow out of the bed, traipse along. We've got other trellises. It can climb up here by this gate. Now this is one of our like roaster squash. So it's a little bit different. It's our first time trying it this year. I think it's called Candy Roaster. And then we've got some giant pink banana squash in here, some delicata squash. So there's kind of a blend of squash all growing in a similar space. There's a giant pink banana squash that started growing behind that cattle panel trellis. Just kind of pushing it out. But overall, the squash is doing really well. Now, I know in certain areas, there's squash vine borer that cause a problem. Luckily, we don't have that problem. Here's our green beans. These are our long beans. I really like growing these. The only downside, I would say, is they just get covered in ants. Now this is our first time growing this. This is our koozie squash. So this plant overall is still pretty small relative to the size of the other squash, but it's got a couple of big fruits that it's set. So we're watching these grow. We'll see how they do. All right, you guys, that's it for a quick update on the garden. We'll get everything harvested, but it's time to come hang out with the animals, see what's going on out here with them. And they're so cute. They really love the attention. And we'd actually rather hang out with the animals than work in the garden any day, really. You'll see it? Mommy sees it. It's right here.